The water is quiet here. Too quiet. On certain days when the reservoir drops and the sun catches the surface at the right angle, you can see them, geometric shadows rising from the mud, foundations, street grids, the skeleton of something that was once alive. This is Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, a triumph of American engineering that drowns the Colorado River beneath 248 square miles of artificial water. But beneath that surface, in the silt and the silence, lies something else entirely. A city that once thrived, that once mattered, that once believed it would last forever. St. Thomas, Nevada, a town that doesn't exist on any current map. A place where families raised children, where businesses opened at dawn, where church bells rang on Sunday mornings. And then, in 1938, the water came. Not as flood or disaster, but as progress, as inevitability, as the price of transforming the American Southwest into something it was never meant to be. Today, when the drought is severe enough, when climate change and overuse drain Lake Mead to historic lows, the ruins emerge like ghosts. Tourists come with cameras. Historians come with questions. And the muddy outlines of St. Thomas reappear, reminding us that beneath every triumph of engineering, beneath every promise of endless growth, there are always sacrifices, always communities discarded in the name of something bigger. How does a functioning American town simply cease to exist? What does it mean when your entire community is valued only for the water that will cover it? And what does St. Thomas tell us about how America decides which places matter and which places don't? If you enjoy deep investigations into America's forgotten cities, ghost towns, and lost empires, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which place to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. To understand St. Thomas, you have to understand the Muddy River, a small tributary flowing through southern Nevada, carrying water from underground springs through a landscape that should be completely inhospitable to human settlement. In 1865, Mormon pioneers saw in the Muddy Valley an opportunity to build Zion in the wilderness. St. Thomas was founded that year, named after Thomas S. Smith, one of the original apostles of the Mormon Church. The settlers arrived to find crushing heat, summer temperatures regularly exceeding 115 degrees, and a temperamental river. But there was water, and in the American West, water was everything. They planted cotton, corn, wheat, and vegetables. They built irrigation ditches with hand tools, constructed adobe homes from mud and clay, established a schoolhouse, a church, a cemetery, all the infrastructure of permanence. But in 1866, a federal survey revealed something devastating. St. Thomas wasn't in Utah territory as everyone believed. It was in Arizona territory. Arizona officials immediately demanded back taxes the Mormons hadn't budgeted for. By 1871, the financial pressure forced Brigham Young to make a decision: abandon the Muddy River settlements. St. Thomas was evacuated. For a decade, it was a ghost town. Then, in 1881, another survey redrew the border. St. Thomas was now in Nevada. Within months, settlers returned. Some were original families. Others were newcomers drawn by reports of good water and cheap land. By 1882, St. Thomas was alive again. This second St. Thomas was scrappier, more diverse. The town was rebuilt from scratch. New adobe buildings rose along dirt streets. A general store opened. A post office was established in 1890, making St. Thomas an official point on the federal map. By 1900, the population reached 600 people. The economy was agricultural. Cotton was the primary cash crop, grown for markets in California and Utah. The work was brutal: summer field work in 115-degree heat, constant maintenance of irrigation ditches, hand harvesting of crops. The people who did this work were largely invisible: Mormon families, transient laborers, Native Americans from nearby Paiute communities, Mexican farm workers. They worked 12-hour days during harvest seasons, paid in cash or credit at the company store. In 1905, the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad completed a line through the Muddy Valley with a stop at St. Thomas. This was transformative. Crops could be shipped more efficiently. Goods arrived from Los Angeles within days. The town had telephone lines, electric lights from a small generator, a proper school building with indoor plumbing. By 1920, St. Thomas had nearly 1,000 residents. Real estate speculators purchased land. There was talk of expanding the railroad depot, attracting a canning factory, building a hospital. The town felt permanent. No one was worried about the river anymore. The water, everyone believed, would always be there. But 60 miles to the south, something was beginning that would make all of that irrelevant. The 1920s in St. Thomas felt like vindication. Cotton prices were strong. The railroad depot handled freight daily. Saturday dances were held in the schoolhouse. These were the rituals that made a place feel permanent. But the wealth was not evenly distributed. Successful farmers built substantial homes with glass windows and wooden floors. Their children attended school regularly. The laborers, field workers, and salt miners lived in small adobe structures without electricity or plumbing. Their children worked in the fields during harvest, missing school. They were kept one bad season away from destitution. In 1922, the U.S. Army Bureau of Reclamation released a report outlining a bold plan: dam the Colorado River in Black Canyon, creating the largest reservoir in the world. Buried in that report was a single line: the reservoir will inundate approximately 247 square miles, including portions of the Muddy River Valley and the town of St. Thomas, Nevada. Most residents dismissed it. The idea that the government would flood an established town seemed absurd. In 1928, Congress passed the Boulder Canyon Project Act, authorizing construction of Hoover Dam. The reservoir, Lake Mead, would submerge St. Thomas completely. The news hit the town like a physical blow. In 1930, federal agents arrived to begin property acquisition through eminent domain. The compensation formula enraged residents. Properties were appraised based on agricultural value in a desert, not as established homes in a functioning community. A farm developed over 30 years was valued at a fraction of replacement cost. The school building was declared government property with no compensation. The church was appraised only for raw materials. Residents hired lawyers and filed petitions. They traveled to Washington to argue their case. The response was immovable. The needs of Los Angeles, of agricultural California, of the Southwest outweighed the needs of one small Nevada town. The first families left in 1931. Some moved to Las Vegas, booming from dam construction. Others relocated to Utah or California. But many stayed: elderly residents who couldn't start over, families with no resources to move, people who refused to accept that their town could simply be erased. Hoover Dam was completed in 1935. Lake Mead began filling immediately. The railroad discontinued service in 1936. The post office closed in 1937. The school shut down in early 1938. By summer, fewer than 50 people remained, mostly elderly residents who had decided they would rather die in their homes than abandon them. The last family, Thomas and Dora Hannig, in their 70s, left on June 11, 1938. They drove north to Overton, leaving behind their home, 50 years of possessions, a producing vegetable garden, and graves of 3 children in the cemetery. The water reached St. Thomas a week later. Within 3 months, the entire town was submerged beneath 70 feet of water. St. Thomas ceased to exist. For nearly 60 years, St. Thomas was invisible. Lake Mead became a popular recreational destination, drawing millions annually. Few knew they were floating above a drowned town. The government made no effort to commemorate it. The town was treated as a necessary sacrifice, a footnote in the story of Hoover Dam. But in 2002, something changed. The Southwest entered a prolonged drought. Lake Mead's water level began dropping. And as it dropped, St. Thomas began emerging. First just foundations of large buildings, then street grids. By 2015, with Lake Mead at just 37% capacity, St. Thomas was more visible than it had been since 1938. The National Park Service installed interpretive signs and established a walking trail through the ruins. The response was overwhelming. Thousands made pilgrimages to see the town. But the visibility raised uncomfortable questions. Why had the government paid so little? Why had there been no effort to preserve the town's history? And what did it say about American priorities that an entire community could be erased to provide water for lawns in Los Angeles? By 2022, Lake Mead had fallen to its lowest level since first filled, at just 27% capacity. Climate scientists warned the reservoir might never refill. St. Thomas was returning not as a temporary curiosity, but as a permanent memorial to the limits of growth in a desert. Today, St. Thomas exists in a strange liminal state, both present and absent, visible and drowned. Whether you can visit depends on rainfall patterns across the Colorado River watershed, on water policy in 7 states, on whether California reduces its consumption. The ruins are managed by the National Park Service as part of Lake Mead National Recreation Area. Descendants of St. Thomas residents have complicated feelings about their ancestral town becoming a tourist attraction. There's tension over who gets to tell the story. The Park Service emphasizes resilience and engineering triumph. Local historians push for examination of displacement and inadequate compensation. Environmental groups use St. Thomas as a symbol of unsustainable water use. Lake Mead provides water for approximately 25 million people across Nevada, Arizona, California, and Mexico. As the reservoir declines, water allocations have become increasingly contentious. Nevada has implemented aggressive conservation. Las Vegas has torn up millions of square feet of grass, paid residents to replace lawns, banned new grass installations. But these measures don't address the fundamental problem. The Colorado River system is being asked to supply more water than it contains. The 1922 Colorado River Compact was based on flow data from one of the wettest periods in the river's history. Modern climate science suggests the river's average flow is about 20% lower than the compact assumes, meaning the system has been overallocated from the beginning. St. Thomas sits at the center of this crisis, literally and symbolically. The town was sacrificed to create a water storage system based on optimistic projections and unsustainable consumption. Its ruins serve as a physical reminder of what happens when growth is prioritized over limits. Native American tribes, particularly the Mojave band of Paiutes, view St. Thomas differently. Their ancestors lived in the muddy river valley for thousands of years before Mormon settlers. Lake Mead flooded sacred sites, gathering areas and burial grounds. The Paiutes received no compensation, no recognition. They weren't consulted. Now they're calling for archaeological surveys, arguing their cultural heritage deserves attention too. St. Thomas is not unique. Across the United States, hundreds of communities have been displaced for dams, highways, military bases, and urban development. What makes St. Thomas significant is not its exceptionalism, but its typicality. It's a perfect case study in how America decides what matters. The pattern is consistent. A place is settled by people with limited resources. They work to make it viable. The community becomes established. And then, when something more valuable is identified, water, minerals, strategic location, the community is swept aside. The justification is always the same: the greater good. Progress requires sacrifice, and the people being asked to sacrifice are never the ones who benefit most. In St. Thomas's case, the primary beneficiaries were Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Las Vegas, cities that would grow to millions. St. Thomas residents received compensation rarely exceeding $20 per property. Enough to start over, perhaps, but not enough to maintain their previous quality of life. This reflects a deeper American belief that places are disposable, that communities can be relocated, that economic value matters more than social and cultural value. It creates casualties rarely acknowledged and even more rarely compensated fairly. St. Thomas also reveals how America treats physical labor. The people who built the town, who dug irrigation ditches, laid railroad tracks, harvested cotton, worked salt mines, were essential, but were first to be abandoned. Their stories weren't recorded. Their compensation was minimal. Many transient workers simply moved on, their contributions erased entirely. The story illuminates the relationship between water and power in the American West. Water has never been a natural resource here. It's always been political. allocated based on influence rather than need. The Colorado River Compact gave California the largest allocation because California had the greatest political power. St. Thomas was sacrificed to this calculus. Its residents had no powerful senator, no corporate backing, no leverage, and perhaps most significantly, St. Thomas reveals the American relationship with permanence. The town was built on the assumption that investment and effort create permanence, that hard work, infrastructure, and institutions make communities endure. But St. Thomas proved that assumption wrong. Permanence in America is not earned through work. It's granted by political and economic power. There are multiple ways to interpret St. Thomas's story. For some, it's a tragic but necessary sacrifice for millions of people. For others, it's government overreach with inadequate compensation. For others still, it's a warning about unsustainable growth. All contain truth. But what's undeniable is that St. Thomas fits a larger pattern: boom, exploitation, collapse, abandonment. We see it in mining towns, agricultural communities, industrial cities. The specifics differ, but the structure is the same. A place is valuable until it isn't, and then it's discarded. The wind moves across the lake bed now, whistling through exposed foundations. The concrete is cracked and stained. The street grids are visible but irregular, distorted by sediment. Nothing grows here yet. The ground is too saturated with salt, too compacted by water, too new to exposure. On weekends, visitors walk among the ruins. They photograph. They read signs. They try to imagine life in a desert town. Some know they're standing where their water comes from, that their showers and lawns exist because this town doesn't. Most don't make that connection. St. Thomas will continue appearing and disappearing based on factors its residents could never control: drought cycles, climate change, water policy in distant cities. The town has become a barometer, a physical measure of how well we're managing resources in a region never meant to support 40 million people. The former residents are mostly gone now. Soon there will be no living memory of the town as a functioning place, only photographs, documents, and stories, and then eventually just the ruins, appearing and disappearing like a question we can't answer. What St. Thomas asks us, what it keeps asking every time it emerges, is what we value and who we're willing to sacrifice. It asks whether progress justifies displacement, whether growth justifies unsustainability, whether the needs of large populations justify the erasure of small communities. These questions are being asked right now in dozens of communities across the American West as water becomes scarcer and growth continues unchecked. Places like St. Thomas are not just ruins. They're questions we keep asking and rarely answer honestly. They're reminders that every triumph of engineering, every city that thrives in the desert exists at someone else's expense. Usually at the expense of people with no power to resist. The water is rising again now, slowly. Lake Mead is still far below capacity, but winter snowpack was better than expected. Within a few years, maybe a decade, St. Thomas will likely be submerged again. The ruins will disappear. The tourists will stop coming. The town will return to invisibility. But it will still be there, waiting. Ready to emerge again the next time the reservoir falls, the next time the Southwest faces the reality of its unsustainable water use, the next time we're forced to confront what we've sacrificed and why. And maybe, if we're paying attention, we'll finally start asking the right questions. If you'd like to see more stories like this, deep investigations into America's forgotten cities and the complex truths they reveal, please like the video, subscribe to Forgotten America Stories, and tell me in the comments which abandoned place or lost community I should explore next. Your support makes these detailed historical journeys possible,